I think some grammar is good to brush up on and familiarize yourself with the rules. But generally, I would advise people against just consuming grammar rules because it's not so helpful for fluency if you're only thinking about the rules and not practicing.
Welcome back, and if you're new here, welcome to the Tutor Take by the PaperTrue studio. I'm Chetna, your host for today, and this is our third episode. In this episode, I talked to Michael Lavers, an ESL teacher from the UK. He's been teaching for over 6 years and has taught students from all over the world. And when he isn't teaching in the classroom, he shares his knowledge of the English language on his podcast, the Level Up English podcast, where he talks about grammar and so much more like culture, history, accents, and study tips. He also creates visual content on his Instagram and YouTube accounts. We link you to all these resources after the podcast episode. It was lovely chatting with a fellow podcaster about English language teaching, and we can't wait to share the conversation with you. So let's get right to it. Hi, Michael. Welcome to the podcast. We're very excited to have you here.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me. Great to be here.
Before we begin, there's something interesting I'd like to point out. This is a little fun fact about our podcast. You're Michael. You're the second person I'm interviewing. The first person I interviewed is also called Michael. So when we heard that you were booked on the podcast, I thought to myself, if the third person I interview is also called Michael, we'll start establishing a pattern here.
It's a good name, I guess. Unless it was some mistake. Maybe I'm the wrong Michael. I don't know.
No, there are just lots of Michaels.
That's a good coincidence.
I suppose. Okay, so let's start with something easy. Perhaps you could tell us how you started teaching English and what brought you to the field.
Yeah, it's a bit random, I suppose, but yeah, it's a good question. So I've been teaching English online for I think 6 years now, and when I was in school, I didn't want to do I didn't know that I wanted to do this. I worked as a gardener after I finished college, and then it was just a bit too boring. I didn't like it. It wasn't for me. So then I kind of went traveling, and I had to clear my head and think about what I wanted to do. And the thing I've always loved doing is learning languages and experiencing languages and even learning about my own language, because there's always something to learn. So I decided to get into this teaching area. I thought it just seemed like an interesting avenue for me. And I also like the aspect of teaching online because it gives me a bit more flexibility with what I want to do. And that was basically it, really, quite random. And it just started from there.
So did you, I think you mentioned in your bio that you have a CELTA certification. Did you do that when you decided you wanted to start teaching, or did that sort of happen after a little bit of experience and then you decided you needed a more formal way of training?
Well, definitely the second one. I think maybe this is good advice for anyone who's like thinking about a new career path, is like maybe don't invest too much if you're not sure if it's for you, because I wasn't 100% sure that this would be what I wanted to do when I started. So I got a basic TEFL qualification, which is teach English as a foreign language. And it took I rushed for it really quickly in a couple of weeks. And that was enough to get started. And then after a few years, I took the CELTA later on. And that just kind of gave me more confidence and a bit more credibility too, I guess.
Oh, that's really interesting. I have been under the impression that both of them are similar. Could you maybe tell us the difference between TEFL and CELTA and why CELTA is more advanced?
Well, yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I don't know a whole lot about it, but as far as I'm aware, like CELTA is it's the Cambridge certificate, and it's recognized all around the world as a really good teaching qualification. TEFL is used by many, many different companies and many people, and it's possible you can just, spend 30 hours online, spend a really small amount of money and get a TEFL qualification. And I've seen some of them online, and they really, on paper, it says you're qualified, but it's really not, it really doesn't prepare you for teaching. It just teaches you a little bit about the basics. So it seems to me like a lot of companies just want to make money with TEFL, and they don't actually care about the qualification. So I think they've kind of, it's like muddied the water. They've kind of, there's too many TEFL ones out there. And I think CELTA is always, it's always the same. There's different CELTA, there's different places where you can get a CELTA certificate, but it's always the same course. So I think that makes it stronger, more reliable.
More standardized even.
That's the word, yeah.
Okay. When you were talking about how there are things you learn in a classroom, and then you go out and you start teaching, and your experience is much larger, much more real. It's quite similar to the experience of language learning itself, right? So I was just sort of wondering what your personal experiences of those moments of, yeah, I learned this in class, but this makes a lot more sense now.
Okay. Yes. So almost like the difference between learning in theory and learning from experience.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I've always been a big advocate of learning through experience. I've always found it just more interesting for me, and it's easier for me to pick up things that way. So there's a lot that I learned, like in some courses that I've done before. They teach a lot about, teaching the grammar, and it has to be very structured in this way. And so I can see the benefits of that, but I found it just seems to me like every student is different, so some students will respond differently to one thing, and then some will respond better to another thing. So I prefer to take an approach where I make a different plan for each student, slightly different. So, rather than having, warm up and lead-in activities and then main activities and practice, some students might be more game focused, like lots of games, especially if they're younger. Some it might just be more conversation. So yeah, maybe it's a little bit less, I don't always religiously follow that structure as is taught in like CELTA and things like that.
Yeah, I would imagine. And because of the rise of the internet in the past decade, if not longer, I think the scene has changed a lot. Because there's now an opportunity to teach people from a distance. The very idea of teaching and the modes of teaching change. So have you found yourself navigating those changes? And if so, how?
Yeah, that's a really interesting topic, isn't it? I mean, for me, it hasn't really changed because I've never taught in a classroom. It's just that hasn't interested me. So I started from online because that was a big part of what I wanted to do. So I've always been online, even like before it was cool, before the pandemic. And yeah, I mean, all I can say is that I've had to get used to the tools that are coming out now. And I think now there are so many different tools you can use. Zoom is of course one of them, but there's so much online resources like, I mean, there's just like game websites that you could play for English games. Like with my young students, they do a lot of like Hangman and stuff like that. Whiteboard features, which you can have like whiteboards that you can share between you and the student, which is, I think, a lot more fun over the internet than in a classroom. So things like that I've had to get used to.
That's interesting. Okay, speaking of getting used to online mediums, your podcast, it's you talk about a lot of things in your podcast. You talk about grammar, you talk about the English accent, you talk about the context around language, you talk about etymology, you talk about history. These are, and it's really cool that you're taking that very aerial, a sort of larger approach to language. I love listening to your episodes about history, particularly your history of the UK. And I was listening to one where you talk about a lot of loan words. But I'm curious. Intuitively, I would think that to teach something as technical as grammar would be difficult to do purely in an auditory mode. Um, what's your approach to that? And do you have to rethink the way you teach grammar when you teach someone online face to face versus when you purely communicate with in an auditory mode with no visual aid, with no, these whiteboard features and no hangman and things like that?
Yeah, that's so interesting. I think it is different on through audio, and some people who listen to my podcast will notice that I've changed a bit recently. So I used to do a lot more grammar focused episodes. I've done like on all the tenses in English and like conditionals as well. And I think it's possible to explain some of these grammar rules like tenses, because you can just talk about the rules and then give some examples. Some people like me, they learn better through listening, and for those people that might resonate. But I have actually started to move away from grammar, partly because I think it's just a bit more boring in audio. Like if I want to learn grammar in another language, I would prefer to use YouTube, so I have audio and visual aspect. But on podcasts, I don't really want to go for a walk and then listen to grammar structures, for example. So more recently, I've been doing more general episodes. So I've been changing that, and I think probably it is a bit easier to show grammar on YouTube, which is what I've been doing. And what was the second part of your question about changing something?
My second part of the question was if what is the difference in your teaching method between teaching grammar on the podcast and teaching grammar either in a video format or in the video call?
Okay. I mean, well, it's very different. If it's with a student, like one-to-one through video call, then obviously it's a lot more interactive and we could do practice together, which I think is good. I generally, I think some grammar is good to brush up on and familiarize yourself with the rules. But generally, I would advise people against just consuming grammar rules, because it's not so helpful for fluency if you're only thinking about the rules and not practicing. So that's the downside of like a podcast where it's just me telling you and there's no interaction. And obviously with a student, it's usually I would spend, say, 20% of the lesson time going over the rules and the grammar, and then the rest of the time, 80%, practicing through conversation and other activities. So I think that's why, more interactive lessons are more beneficial.
What kind of activities do you tend to recommend to your students?
It really depends. Like in the lesson, I might just ask questions using the grammar. Say if it is a grammar lesson. So say if it was present perfect tense, like I have done, I might just ask random questions like, what's the coolest thing you have ever done? Or, what have you done this week? Or just like a challenge, like tell me something that happened recently using present perfect. And I might be listening for whether they're using it correctly or not. What other activities? Yeah, I'm especially with younger students, as I said, there's a lot of games I play. There's like I play noughts and crosses, or Americans would call it tic-tac-toe.
Yeah.
But this is where I put like a word inside the box saying like an adjective. And then we take turns telling a story, like one line of a story. And in order to put your nought or your cross on the grid, you have to use the word in your story.
Ooh,
so that's what I've been doing
cool.
recently, which is fun. Yeah.
That sounds cool. So do you teach people from all over the world?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I'm always super proud of that. In fact, I've got a map on my website from where all of my students are from. And my goal is to make the map like as filled in as possible.
Okay.
So I haven't counted the countries, but yeah, all over the world, like every continent apart
That's
from
really
Antarctica.
Yeah, I would imagine. That's
There's
a bit
no
difficult.
no penguins
check
in my
off a
lessons,
list.
but
I think penguins are up in the north.
I
It's just
thought they were south because I always imagine polar bears on the melting ice.
I thought it was just, these camps excavating the continent in the south. That's it.
Okay. Maybe the listeners can correct us because I'm not
Yeah,
sure.
we need to look this up.
Yeah.
I wanted to sort of tie in that idea with your own journey of language learning. You said you've always liked learning languages. Is that an interest you had before starting to teach as well? A, B, what languages have you learned and are you learning, trying to
Yeah.
acquire all of those levels?
Yeah. I mean, I've dabbled in many languages since, I guess, when did I start? Probably the same as like you and a lot of the listeners is in school, you might learn languages, but it's not that useful. Like we learned French and Spanish, but I don't remember much of it. So I guess when I was 16, I first became interested in languages. I don't remember why. It's just like maybe in my DNA, I guess. I don't know. So I tried like French, I've tried German, I've tried different languages around Europe and Asia as well. But I've forgotten pretty much all of them now. But at the moment, I'm learning Japanese, Chinese, and Cornish language. And yeah, Japanese has been about 10 years now. It's been quite a long time. But yeah, I've always been fascinated by Asian languages, especially just because they're so different from what I'm used to here in England.
Yeah, they are. Yeah, I was thinking about, so when I like learning languages, I often like to find connections between the languages I already know and the ones I'm learning. So when I was listening to your episode about loan words, about words from other languages, I was thinking to myself that I was thinking about a year ago, I discovered that the word cash might have its etymology in my mother tongue.
Oh, okay. I never knew that.
Yeah, my mother tongue is Tamil, and the root word is kasu, which basically means, just loose change, just cash you have in your pocket, things like that. So I wanted to ask you if you have you ever had the experience of your students making connections like that, or do you tend to maybe bring it up if you know? Do you think that helps a person in learning, in having that book, in having that word stick in their memory better?
Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, I love this topic, and I actually, coincidentally, I recorded a video just now before we chatted today about loan words, and it's such an interesting topic. I think sometimes I'll bring it up, but I think it's more for fun rather than because it's useful. I mean, there are like cognates and false friends that I think are important to talk about. Like, if you are French and you're learning English, there's so many words that are almost the same but are pronounced differently. So in that case, yeah.
Yeah, or mean different things in the original French, which is a very interesting concept.
That's really confusing, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. That's a false friend,
in that
right?
case, you have to learn. Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
I think that's what it is.
Where they look the same word, but they're not. They don't have the same meaning.
Yeah.
So it's good to learn the rules in that case, and like you're pronouncing it the French way, not the English way, for example. But yeah, like one that I was talking about the other day with a student was the phrase "no can do." Have you heard that before?
Yes.
Do you know where that comes from? Like the language?
Where does it come from?
Apparently, it's from Chinese. Because in Chinese, they say, obviously it's translated, but they say "no can do."
Oh.
And we took it into English because it doesn't really sound right in English. Like "no can do," it's not really grammatically correct.
Yeah.
So that's a fun one, and I think giving the background makes it easier to remember as well because that's interesting.
Yeah, it is interesting, and so many things we say we just speak in daily life aren't always, you know, uh, things from the textbook, so to speak. We don't speak like that. How do you, as a teacher, do you feel like it's important for you in the classroom or outside, either do it yourself or enable students to explore this idea by themselves? The idea of what you read in a textbook is not what you speak. How do you help students bridge that gap?
That's a really interesting question. I mean, whenever students ask me for like advice on how to learn English, I will always say, most of my students are intermediate or higher learners, and I kind of recommend that they consider just practicing in ways they enjoy. So maybe that means putting down the textbook and using more like what's the word, like genuine materials, like watching TV shows or video games or reading books. It doesn't have to be a textbook. No, I think really that's the best way to learn, you could say, real English, and not just speak like a robot. Because I mean, if you learn from a textbook, probably you will end up speaking like a robot because you're going to say everything perfectly, and that's not really how people speak in the real world, unfortunately.
That's true. That's true.
I don't know if I answered your question. Maybe I did.
It's fine. Let's just go with the conversation. How has your own journey of language learning, the kind of methods you employ to learn, or the methods, do you learn these languages formally or on your own?
Yeah, on my own. Yeah.
On your own.
Well, I mean, with conversation partners, but that's it. Yeah.
So not like a go to class and.
No, I've never done that actually, personally. I don't know why.
Fair enough. Just doing that exercise, does that help you understand how you can improve your teaching methods, or sort of incorporate how the methods you use for learning languages into how you teach?
100%. Yeah. I mean, maybe it's like embarrassingly high, like the amount to which I do that. People might think I'm using my experience from the CELTA course or something to teach, but it's pretty much almost 100% from my own experience as a learner. I just have to translate it over, say, from Japanese to English, because I kind of experiment and I see what works best for me, and I presume maybe this will work for you as well. And I guess that the learners who learn in a similar way to me will be attracted to my way of teaching, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah. So
I mean, it makes sense because learning is not a singular idea, or it's not a one solution sort. There are a lot of ways to do it. So that makes a lot of sense, to be honest.
Yeah, like what could be an example of that? Like if you no, I don't have an example, never mind.
No, like even for example, learning vocabulary, some people might find it better to write the words out a few times, while others, like me, for example, I need to hear it a few times. I need to hear the word being used, and then it'll stick in my head because then I'll have the context around it. Which is why, for example, watching films, listening to songs, that works better than me than just memorizing words.
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, I mean, that's exactly what I would say to a lot of learners is, whenever I listen to a song in another language, I feel more motivated to learn and I get excited. I'm picking up the words from the song. So that's kind of what I would recommend to them, just based on my experience, because it's fun. And I mean, maybe if a learner doesn't like that way of learning, then maybe they can find a teacher who like matches with their style of learning. That's what I would always suggest.
So you've been saying that you've taught online for the last 6 years. I think it's the pandemic that has really blown up the the scene of people teaching online. Um, for people who are starting out, for people who don't know where to go, and for people who are sort of dealing with maybe not being able to figure out where they should start, what advice do you have for them, for novice teachers who are just beginning to teach online?
Yeah, that's always a tricky one. I remember when I started, I had no idea where to go. And it's a really scary feeling because it was something I really wanted to do. I just didn't know where to start. So based on my own mistakes, one thing that I would say is start before you think you're ready, which is not so specific. But what I was doing was I was, making all these lesson plans before I even had any students. It's like, no, before I get a student, I've got to make all these lesson plans just so I'm prepared for them. And I don't think it works that way. I was really just lying to myself, and I was afraid to get started. So I was kind of delaying the process. So that's my first piece of advice, is that just start right away and don't worry about if you're not completely ready. But yeah, more practically, rather than worrying right away about getting a website set up or anything like that, I mean, I didn't start with it, but I've had a lot of success with italki, the website for online teaching. And there's many other ones as well. So I would suggest applying to as many teaching websites as you can. And one of them are bound to accept you, even if you have to apply several times to get accepted. And then start teaching through there. And that's where you can build confidence. And then hopefully you'll get some students. I didn't get my first student for a few months after I started. So it does take some time. And then while you're doing that, you can start building up a website if you want to, and other resources as well. But yeah, I think in summary, like, keep it simple, like don't plan on writing books and websites like right from day one.
Would you ever be open to teaching in a classroom with people in an ideal world?
I thought about it, especially if it means I can live in another country. I thought that would be fun. But I don't think I could do it because this is a personal thing, but I hate being told what to do. Even in the past where I've had like the perfect dream job, it was a really good job, but someone was telling me what I should do, and I didn't like that. So I maybe if I could be my own boss and like I started my own language school, I would like that. But not if I was working in another school.
That would be
I
nice.
hope that doesn't sound too spoiled.
No, it doesn't. I mean, it's also a matter of comfort zone. I suppose you need to have the autonomy to develop your teaching methods and do what you want, essentially.
Yeah, I'm quite a shy person, so it's tricky.
Do you think the languages that a person already knows affects the way they learn English? Have you seen that happening?
Do you mean your mother tongue or a second language you pick up?
Or any number of languages, For example, I mean, there are lots of people who know more. We say ESL, but to be very honest, English could be a third or fourth language for some people. So
that's a good point. Yeah, I never thought about that. It should be EL maybe. But yeah, I mean, definitely. I've noticed, I mean, it's really good for a teacher to notice these patterns, because just by knowing what country the learner is from, you can guess what they're going to have problems with. So, but this isn't a judgment, of course. This is just, the natural differences between accents and languages. So, a lot of Portuguese speakers, like say in Brazil, for example, obviously Portugal, they will have problems with like the past tense ed. So rather than saying worked, like past tense for worked, they'll say like worked, something like that. I'm not sure why that is. Maybe it's something about the way it's taught in school.
And yeah, obviously. So I'm so sorry. Yeah. Is Portuguese phonetic? Maybe. That's
I have no
why.
idea. I don't know anything about Portuguese, so maybe.
Okay.
Yeah, and like obviously in Japan, the L and the R sound are very tricky.
Yeah.
Every country has their difficulties, so I think that's good to be aware of. I mean, are you aware of any from the languages around you?
So I've spoken English my entire. Okay, what I've noticed is that here we tend to skip articles, even if we know that articles exist in the English language. It just subconsciously happens because a lot of Indian languages don't have that concept. We don't have a and the.
Hmm.
We have one versus many, and so that is the only indicator of referring to an object. So I thought that was really interesting, and that is like a particular issue with either the way people tend to form sentences or the kind of syllables they already know because of the languages they've grown up learning.
Yeah, it's so interesting. Yeah, I didn't know that. I haven't had many Indian students actually, so I haven't picked up on the patterns yet. But I think it's good to know that. Yeah, you pick up bad habits in different languages, don't you?
It's not bad habits, it's old habits, I guess.
Yeah, old habits. Yeah, I guess it's bad if it's used in the new language, right? Like I've had that a lot because Japanese and Chinese are quite similar in some ways,
Mm.
and sometimes I'll say the wrong word in the wrong language, and you know the writing is similar, but the grammar, so the sentence order is different. So I will often say Chinese sentence with Japanese sentence order, and it just makes no sense.
That's really interesting. Um, how important is it to have that qualification in your hand, the certificate? Is does it does it affect the jobs you get drastically, or can you make do? Is it just is because to be very honest, especially in the pandemic, gaining access to these kinds of courses has become a lot harder.
Hmm.
So I was just wondering, as someone who's been trained by these programs, what your take on this is, whether these kind of certificates still have the importance that they do, or can or has the community, the teaching community, become more open to accepting teachers without those certificates?
Oh yeah, I have a lot to say on that. Well, first of all, I think responding to one point you said with the pandemic, in some ways it's become harder, but also easier as well because I always wanted to take a CELTA, but I didn't want to have to go to a different city and take it because I didn't live in London at the time. So I only took the CELTA after the pandemic started because it was completely online. So that
Oh,
means I could do it from home and it was much more convenient for me.
okay.
So that's one benefit in some cases where it can be done anywhere in the world now, which is nice. Because yeah, in my course there were people from all over the world, over Europe and Asia, taking the course. And in terms of whether it's necessary, you can put it this way: throughout my 6 years, I've never really been asked whether I am qualified. Because I work for myself, students I think will judge their teacher based on the results, and that no students go, what qualification do you have? Obviously it's a bit rude, but no one has asked that. So even if I had no experience or no qualification, I think I still could have continued teaching. But obviously the downside of that is there are a lot of people out there, I'm sure, who are teaching people and they're not, they don't really know what they're doing maybe. So that's something that learners have to look out for, is that they're choosing the teacher who knows what they're talking about. But yeah, I don't think qualifications are always necessary. I think results speak for themselves a lot of the time, don't they?
That's true. They do. But yeah, I also asked that to sort of understand the level of importance this is given, and whether people who want, because whether everybody who wants to become a teacher has the access to the resources that can help them become a better teacher. So it was from that perspective I asked.
Well, oh yeah. I mean, I also wanted to say it does depend what you want to do. So if you want to work in a language school, a lot of the time they might need a university degree. Some of them, depending on the country, will just ask for CELTA or even less maybe. So it depends what you want to do. But if you want to become a teacher and work online for yourself, obviously if it's your website, you make the rules. If you want to apply for like italki or a similar tutoring website, they require a qualification, but I don't think they're really fussy on which one it is. It could be any qualification.
Okay.
So it depends. Depends, yeah.
Yeah, I suppose all of that is changing now, because the very idea of education and whether people have access to it is being debated because of the world we live in nowadays, which is interesting.
Maybe it'll be a more equal world in the future. Hopefully people will have access to the same education wherever they are because of the internet. That would be nice.
Hopefully, that will be nice. Okay. I forget. Do you do group sessions as well with your students?
Oh yes. This is something I've been doing since almost a year now. It's gone. That last year's gone so quickly, and I was always scared of it before, and I was always like really nervous. Like, what if it goes badly? What if I can't manage the group properly? And after the first lesson I did, it went so well. It was so much fun. People were talking and practicing together. I was helping guide them through the conversation, and it was so much fun. So it's been something I've been doing almost every week for the past year now. I do 2 group lessons a week, and it's amazing because you have this like cultural exchange. People from all different backgrounds and languages are sharing their ideas. And I think it depends on the learner, but I think I've changed my mind about group lessons. I used to think they're not as good as one-to-one lessons, and now I think they can be even better in some aspects. So yeah, I like them a lot.
Yeah, that's interesting. Could you maybe tell us what you like best in each type of class?
Yeah, I think one aspect is it's more like a real life practice. So if it's just me and a student, we can practice conversation, but I'm trying to tailor my language to them, and I'm not going to talk like exactly like someone would in real life on the street, because I'm going to try to make sure they understand and help correct them. But in a group lesson, it's just like a group of people with different accents trying to communicate, obviously with me as well, and it just feels more genuine, and it's just more exciting because different people sharing opinions rather than just someone talking and me listening and occasionally helping as well.
Oh, that's a good point.
I think you were asking about different ages, right? Different ages of people and how if they have different interests.
I was asking if there are different ways. No, not ways. I'm not going to define the word. Like, okay, so for example, in our last episode, I asked Michael if age makes a difference in how they understand a language. And he was talking about how adults tend to be more aware of context and kids just learn what they're taught. So do you see the kind of ways they use to imbibe the language change across age?
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I mean, definitely. I mean, in my experience, I think there's definitely a difference between older people and let's say more middle-aged people, like adults. Because I've had a few students who are like over retirement age, and they tend to be really enthusiastic about the language, but it's more like a hobby for them. And whereas someone in their 20s or 30s, it might be more for travel or work, and they have this motivation because they want it to improve their lives. Whereas I find the people that are really passionate are the older people, where it's just a passion, it's a hobby. And there may not be like a reason for learning, it's just because they like it. And so that's an interesting difference. And for kids, kids are always a tricky one. Like, unfortunately, very often, I'd say like probably at least 80% of the kids that I have taught, they don't want to learn English. Like that their parents are making them learn.
Yeah,
and they don't want to do it.
He said that too, actually. He just said kids are just there because their parents have sent them, which, I mean, sure.
Yeah. And I think another motivation in the 20% that do want to learn, a big motivation is trying to impress other people or be better than their friends. It's like this competitiveness. So I've got some students who like they'll kind of make fun of their friends for not being as good at them in English. And it's not the best reason to improve, but I can understand when you're like a teenager, that's a strong motivation is to kind of go up the hierarchy of friends and be cooler.
I suppose. There's a particular emphasis you give to accent when you, in your podcast especially. I don't know if you keep that same emphasis in the classroom. I was just wondering, to put it very bluntly, why? Because English is spoken all over the world. The whole, I mean, especially now, it's sort of embraced, or I hope it is. Maybe I'm just being ideal. Embraced as a language that can be malleable, that can be put in different contexts because it has traveled so far and wide. And so I was just wondering, where did this emphasis on talking about the British accent come from?
This is a really funny question because I was never so interested in teaching accent. So for the first few years, I didn't really look at accent at all. I just said it's not something that I specialize in. I don't really do much of that. And my philosophy used to be accent will develop naturally if you just focus on practice, focus on talking, reading, writing, listening. Your accent will develop naturally over time. And it's not going to be the British accent. It's going to be your accent. As long as your pronunciation is good, don't worry about accent. And I still kind of believe that in some way, but my content is always shaped by the viewers and the listeners. And the number one request I get is for videos about accent and pronunciation. Wow. And also the ones that I make, they do like 5 times better, like more comments and more views. So it's kind of like a balance. Like I want to do what I enjoy, but also I want to make content that people enjoy and they find useful.
Okay.
So probably if no one requested accent, I might not make any videos on it. But people like it and they find it useful, so I'll try to do it justice. So I'm still at the moment I'm still kind of wondering how much emphasis I should put on it, because at the beginning of a lot of my accent videos, I always say, I'm going to teach you about this feature of British accent today, but keep in mind there are many accents, and don't worry too much if you can't do it. It's going to happen naturally. So I always have to give that disclaimer.
Yeah.
So people don't worry too much about learning all these rules.
Yeah, I did notice that as well, and I'm glad you bring it up, because even the very idea of a British accent, that's not one thing. I know you clarify that you're talking about received pronunciation, but for those of us who aren't familiar with the number of accents within the UK, it's good that that's something you bring up.
Yeah, I do get a lot of hate comments about that, of people like there's not just one British accent, and they do have a point, but I still would recommend to learners that they learn what we call the standard textbook pronunciation, and then when they get more advanced, they could experiment with other dialects if they think that would be useful for them,
I suppose. Yeah, okay. Wow, it's been almost 50 minutes. This has been a very interesting conversation, and There's a lot for me to think about. I'm just going to spend the rest of the evening thinking about all these cool things.
I've enjoyed it. Yeah, hopefully I haven't talked too much, I hope. But yeah, it's been really fun. Thank you.
That was quite the conversation, wasn't it? Thanks for tuning into the episode. We loved recording it for you, as we always do, and we hope you enjoyed it as well. As I was telling him, there is a lot to think about. He has such wonderful insights about the mediums teachers use nowadays, how fluid and versatile teaching can be, and most importantly, everyone has their own learning curve that they should embrace. Isn't that wonderful? Oh, and speaking of the richness of exploring languages, the time is finally here for us to tell you about his podcast, the Level Up English podcast. With episodes about a range of topics, including grammar and syntax, history, tips for effective study, and even interviews with other teachers. This is a podcast you can listen to when you feel like you need a more relaxed way of studying. We sure love listening to it. You can find links to the podcast and his social media handles in the description section of this episode. And check us out too. We're PaperTrue, an editing and proofreading company, and we regularly create content about writing in the English language. Whether you're a student, professional, or aspiring writer, you'll find loads of articles, infographics, checklists, and so much more to help you in your writing journey. You can also find us on social media. Links are in the description, or head over to our resource center. If you have any queries, questions, comments, or if you know anyone who'd like to be featured on this podcast, write to us at thestudio@papertrue.com. We'd love to hear from you. So while you're waiting for the next episode, which will be out in just a few short weeks, check out all these cool things. Subscribe to us so you get notified when a new episode drops. Listen to our first two episodes if you haven't already, and we'll see you very, very soon. Until then, goodbye and have a lovely day.